Hello, my name is Kathleen Carroll, Chair of the Committee to Protect Journalists, and I'm honored to welcome you, our very special guest, to this conversation about press freedom. Tonight, four amazing people are joining us. Let me introduce them. First, Dapo Oluwaniyi, founder and CEO of Nigeria's Premium Times and the Premium Times Center for Investigative Journalism. A heroic man who has devoted his life to journalism that holds the powerful to account and the freedoms that enable that work. Welcome, Dapo.
Thank you very much, Kathleen.
Patrick Gaspard, president of the Open Society Foundations and the chair of the International Press Freedom Awards program you just saw. Patrick has spent his life working on social justice issues in a variety of positions, including at the White House and as U.S. ambassador to South Africa in the Obama administration. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you, Kathleen.
And Lester Holt, anchor of the NBC Nightly News and Dateline NBC, a hardworking CPJ board member and host of our 2020 International Press Freedom Awards program. Lester is no desk-bound anchor. He is constantly reporting from the field and is a tireless champion of the journalists who toil to bring stories and truth to their audiences. Welcome, Lester.
Thank you, Kathleen.
And we are waiting, as I can see him signing on, Shahidul Alam, founder of, among other things, the Drick Picture Library. Shahidul is a noted photographer, storyteller, and a guru to the many photojournalists he has trained and inspired in Bangladesh and beyond.
And we've seen voters being very
Shahidul. There you are. Hello, Shahidul. How nice to see you. Great. I was going to ask you the first question, because tonight what we're going to do is imagine that we are all together in a comfortable place, in comfortable chairs, possibly with a beverage of our choice, just having a conversation. We are going to be the anti-Zoom meeting group.
Okay.
Shahidul, if you are ready, I'd like to start with you, if I might, just to have you talk. Is that all right?
Is how
Let me
coronavirus
give
is
you a little bit more light.
in terms of
Okay.
how people are
Well,
viewing.
I tell you what, I'm going to start with Dapo while you're getting yourself situated. How's that? Dapo, your acceptance speech had a very potent way of connecting the work that journalists do and the societies that they live in. And you've often spoken about how a free press is essential for democracies to grow, because a free press helps societies identify problems so they can be solved. I wonder if you have a specific example that you could talk about, a time when journalism really did help identify a problem or find a solution.
This idea of
Well, thank you very much, Kathleen. I think the history of Nigeria itself provides the backdrop for these kinds of expression. Our media helped to make the case for independence in the 60s. No doubt, there's no way you read Nigeria's history today, front and center. A good place has been given to the role of the founding fathers of our modern press. The country also went into a bloody civil war, which claimed about 2 million lives. Journalism was also generally now being credited for laying the basis for the kind of consensus that built unity after that war. But I think the most significant moment for journalism had been the period of those 30 crazy years of military autocracy in this country. And no way you can write the history of return to democracy in Nigeria without putting the press as in the front rank. And as we proceed in our fourth republic today, the biggest advocate, the biggest push for the anti-corruption, which has really wrecked the image and reputation of Nigeria, has been Nigeria's journalism. So without doubt, I think no way you can characterize the Nigerian story without giving a very noble place to journalism, in spite of all its own failings and all its own difficulties. It's one of the most noble institutions and pillars of in the making of a Nigeria of today.
I think we all needed to hear something like that. Somebody from someone with your courage and your long view of what journalism can do for a country. And so we thank you for that. Shahidul, I wonder if I could talk with you a little bit about how you balance the normal and natural fear you might have. You talked about being, when you've been arrested, you were worried about being killed, very legitimately worried about being killed. And the story you tell about being in your flat 2 years ago, when it was broken into and you were trying to resist and screaming, it's a harrowing story. And yet you constantly are putting yourself on the front lines. How do you balance that fear with your passion for what you do?
I was literally sitting exactly where I'm sitting now.
Oh my gosh.
This is what we do. Sure, there is fear, but that has to do with reality. I think one needs to recognize what that reality is. But for me, what gives me the strength is that I see myself as a part of the community, a much bigger community of which I am a very small part. And I think while I was in jail and while I did suffer, I think they suffered a lot more. And often we forget when we celebrate people who are in jail, have been victimized, we forget what the people outside have to go through at a time like this. We also forget that while I'm a prominent journalist and I'm supported by people like you and people across the globe, there are people all across the country in Bangladesh and in many other countries whose lives are at peril, who do not make it to the headlines, who do not have CPJ awards and who do not get any of this attention. And they're the ones we need to fight for. So I don't really see this as something for myself. And I see the pain as a collective pain and the struggle as a collective struggle.
It's amazing. Thank you so much. Patrick, when you were an ambassador, I assume one of the things that you had to talk about the governments that you dealt with was honoring press freedoms and the kinds of values that you just heard Dapo and Shahidul talk about. And I wonder if you feel that those are lost now in the United States, that its primacy, its influence is lost. CPJ has just this week released some recommendations to the Biden administration to try and begin to restore that. But do you feel that it's gone forever, or are you hopeful?
Well, first, Kathleen, let me say it's just an extraordinary honor to be on this panel with you, Lester Holt, and our two extraordinary honorees. I'll say in a nonpartisan way that in the last 4 years, we've had a bit of a values vacation as it relates to press freedom and human rights litigated through the U.S. State Department, national security, and most especially through our White House. There's a way that the rhetoric of the current administration and their attacks levied against American U.S.-based press has been picked up and replicated and amplified in the idiom of autocrats who have taken their lead from the U.S. president. Furthermore, there's a way that the U.S. has been a reliable partner in infrastructures like the work through Voice of America to lift up the critical question of the importance of independent media as a bulwark in our democracies. As Lester said in his introduction of tonight's virtual event, media sometimes is what stands between all of us and the slide into confusion. So there's profound concern about the general slide into confusion and the fact-free world that we find ourselves living in right now. However, everything lost need not be lost forever. There is a tremendous appetite around the world, certainly with my friends in South Africa, the diplomats that I found myself engaged in throughout the African continent. There's a real appetite for the U.S. to re-enter into the question of media freedom and to lend its voice and protection of the Dapos, the Shahiduls of this world. There are important recommendations that CPJ makes in its white paper. And I think that it's important to really press the case on them, but it's also hugely important through a diplomatic corps, through our structures, to make sure that we are deepening partnerships here. When I served as U.S. ambassador to South Africa, I discovered, much to my consternation, that there were still apartheid era laws on the books in South Africa that allowed the government to apply too wide a definition to national interest in a way that enabled them to censor, to shut down the ability to have independent voice. And that's a thing that is threatening in any democracy. We have to lean into these questions and lift up partnership, and we have to invest meaningfully in a different course of action. So everything lost is not lost forever, and this is a moment of real reset in the world.
Well, that's a hopeful note. Although you're precisely right that the vaguest words in the English language are national security or national interests, which can be interpreted widely, alas. Lester, I wonder if I could ask you to talk a little bit about your own personal passion for this issue. I mean, you spent a lot of time in the field as well as anchoring an incredibly important news program. Was there a particular incident or pattern that crystallized this issue for you?
Wouldn't say a particular incident. I think, like a lot of people, I came up in the 70s, really started reporting in earnest in the 80s. I think it was a time you thought of press freedom issues as being somewhere over there, overseas. I have certainly worked in countries without a free press, reported from North Korea and Iran and Iraq under Saddam Hussein, and was briefly detained in Egypt and had equipment confiscated. But I always thought you kind of accepted on some level, not accepted, but understood overseas. I listened to Amal Clooney tonight in her remarks, and she said she was motivated by anger. And I think that kind of describes where I am right now. Some of those images we showed at the beginning of tonight's program of reporters, being targeted with tear gas. At least two of them were my colleagues, people that work with me. And I think there is a sense of anger and to see that in our country and to see us having to fight, these sorts of abuses, it's symptomatic of something larger. But I think, I hope that those images, the way we're able to cover them now, it will kind of bring people to the table to understand not only what's happening against the press, but what the larger threat is. And I think of some of the stories of our time, even right now, as we watch the post-election, I want people to imagine that story playing out without a free and independent press to talk about the truth, to separate fact from fiction, to try to quash the rumors. So many stories of our time. And I think one of our challenges is to kind of re-educate people about who we are, why we do what we do, and what the world and life would be like without people that could stand up and be champions of the truth. People talk about bias, and I said, damn right I have a bias. I have a bias toward the truth, to factual storytelling. That should be our message.
One of our other press freedom winners, Svetlana Prokopyeva, said something in her acceptance remark that really resonates for both, for everyone, I think all of us in this conversation. She said, in today's Russia, many officials, including prosecutors and judges, do not understand the journalist's mission or why we need freedom of speech. And I would say that extends in many countries to just average citizens who as Lester just said, we've lost our trust. Thabo, you have been such a fierce advocate for a free press. How do you convince, if you're not just battling the government, how do you convince average people of the value of a free press? What are those conversations like?
Well, sometimes it can be a bit abstract here, no doubt about it. But one can start from the central question of why are things getting wrong? Why should we live like this? Why should our country be so tied in this kind of image? Why 60 years after independence, with just enormous wealth in this country, why are we such in a rickety shape? Why are institutions failing? Why suddenly Nigeria used to be, the heartland of great judiciary? Why is it all falling apart? And, people can easily purchase justice. I was growing up at a time that you saw all the professors and so on. You all wanted to look like these people. Suddenly, all our schools are now broken, and you got to link it that somebody needs to speak for society, and you have to be able to demonstrate that. Without a free press, indeed, democracy is impossible. Good society is impossible. Development is impossible. This is the case we make always. And I think people get it a little bit, because once you are on the straight and correct path, autocracy in one way, or the illiberal states that we have in this country over the years come after you. So people can connect it between what you're doing and we just went through 1 month of a very terrible protest against a terrible police culture here. And people can see that, with government lying and making a case, in fact, joining the terrible disinformation campaign again. So, people invariably get to understand, but often too that the government is able to make a case against the press, but they never win for too long because people don't get it.
Could we talk for a little bit about local journalism, which is one of the most endangered kinds of journalism everywhere? Shahidul, you have spent the last 30 years planting seeds in communities around the region, particularly encouraging visual journalists, which have their own particular danger. But I'd like to hear you talk about what you see as the future of local journalism, given all the pressures, given the importance of it in a community's life. How is it? Are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? Oh, you're muted, Shahidul.
I am optimistic, primarily because we're a people who love democracy and freedom. There's this great tradition. This country was born from a fight to speak our own language, and students and intellectuals have played such a vibrant role throughout our history to give us what we have. What is problematic for me today is the media itself has to a large extent abdicated, except for notable exceptions. The media, in place of being the fourth estate, has become a spokesperson for the government, and that becomes problematic. In the film, you might have seen me wearing a Julian Assange t-shirt, and while Lester was talking about it, it's important to recognize that governments which speak about democracy and freedom and espouse it in their rhetoric, when it comes close to home, suddenly takes a very different impression. But the converse of that is we have a people who do love democracy. And while there was a whole globe of people campaigning from the outside, it was people inside the country who took far bigger risks to be on the streets, to campaign, to never give up, which gives me that hope. And I think we have problems because technology can be abused and is being abused. All these governments talk of fake news. I think the biggest proponent of fake news is the government in most cases. But it is the people who have taken it on board and who are subverting the system. And I think over a period of time, when all of us become journalists of a sort, it'll be far more difficult to cap.
Can I add one thing to that, if that's okay, Kathleen, to Shahidul's comments there? I think, of course, there's a great threat from autocrats. There's a great threat from the new way that the media ecosystem is designed because of social media. So there's a real threat to local journalism. But can I also say that the other threat that exists here is a threat that comes from a lack of innovation on behalf of those who work in local independent media. Maria Ressa was just interviewing Amal Clooney. Maria Ressa is extraordinary leader, not just because of her courage, but because of her ability to innovate. If you look at the direction of travel for Rappler, how they've taken advantage of the new media and the way the vast majority of people are now receiving and socializing information in their lives, Maria understood that there's an entirely different way to build networks, to build community, and that it was incumbent upon her and her colleagues in Rappler to make that transition. Regrettably, and I can say this as an organization that works in partnership with independent media around the world, too many brave, smart, courageous editors, publishers, journalists have to be dragged kicking and screaming into 21st century innovations in how we communicate. And that can't be lost on any of us as we think about what a reset looks like.
That's really true. Lester and Shahidul, both of you have spent your careers in a visual medium, and that has been, it's very powerful. Video can take you there, a camera can take you there. A still picture freezes a moment and allows an intimacy with the news that didn't exist before we had cameras. They do present particular dangers, however, to journalists in the field because they're more easily targeted. And there's a new danger on the horizon, and that is the degree of fakery in video. There's a lot of mischief going on with computers and images. How do you see us being able to navigate that particular?
It's there's been such a democratization on the technical side of equipment that our professional network equipment looks kind of like consumer equipment sometimes. So in many ways it makes our job easier that we sometimes can conceal or not have as big a footprint, a lower profile in some of the situations that we saw this evening. But the fakery is a huge issue. I mean, we control a lot of our content with, our crews and our photographers, but a lot of course, things that get reported start on the internet with images. And, we spend an awful lot of time making sure that what is being shared on the internet, what is creating the story, that we can verify. And if we can't, that we can be transparent. I think that the larger question is it's never been more important for us to be transparent in what we do and how we do it, that we let people into the process to kind of start trying to rebuild that trust, to understand that we don't, unlike, sometimes the citizen journalists, we have to go through a few more steps before we put something on the air. And I think that's got to be part of our how we re-educate the public about the importance of a free and independent press, and that we do have checks to make sure that what we're putting on, we can verify, we can tell you where it came from, we can tell you what it means. I mean, so much of what we see anymore, is through a soda straw. It's a very narrow image of something, and our challenge is to broaden that lens out as I mix my metaphors, but to broaden that view out and to help people understand how things are seen and how we can put them into some kind of a context.
Good. And Shahidul, how do you see this?
Yeah, well, device is what I do a lot of my work with today. I remember in 2010, I was doing interviews of the police who had blockaded our gallery using a flip, which was a $35 camera at that time. But I think, if we talk of fake news or whatever, we forget that it's always been there. I think Louis Hine talked about, in the early 1900s, said something very interesting. He said, while photographs may not lie, liars may take photographs. And liars today can be presidents and can be evangelists, can be advertising people. I think the mistake we make is putting our trust in the medium as opposed to the source. And at the end of the day, the veracity of the source is the only thing that we can rely upon. And that requires building trust, that requires establishing credibility, and it doesn't happen overnight. It happens because you've walked that walk for a very, very long time. and people know if so and so is saying it, I can believe it, not because what's being said, but because so and so is saying it. And I think we need to turn it around. So it's not the photograph or the video that we trust, it's who the storyteller is. And whatever tool they might use, whether it's words, whether it's pictures, whether it's whatever new tool might come up on the horizon, at the end of the day, we need to be questioning constantly, questioning not only the medium, but also the source, and ensuring that the source is credible. That is the only thing we have to live by.
Well, each of you seem a good deal more optimistic than others may feel on any given day. I think that's a really remarkable thing. Patrick, let me just ask you quickly to build on the point you were making about the global view you have of independent media and how you support it. You know, Amal Clooney was angry, but she also ended up being optimistic. Do you share that view? Do you share her optimism?
I think, Kathleen, that it's impossible to be engaged in the work of truth telling, the work of democracy building, the work of investing in the architecture of freedom if you're not optimistic, if you don't believe that old notion that the arc of the moral universe bends in a particular way. So I share an optimism, but I think that it's incumbent upon all of us to try to sometimes impose our will on that arc and to put our thumb a bit on the scales. And that requires advocacy, it requires strategic investment, and it requires the ability to be bold in how we speak out. And all of us have to remember, as George Orwell noted, that press freedom is fundamentally about the ability for citizens to not only build account, but to hold up their singular voices. And that is, at the end of the day, a notion that people matter, their agency is what should really inform the direction of our governance. And for me, I'm always going to put my faith in the ability of people to ultimately, maybe not in the first instance, maybe not in the second instance, but to ultimately adhere to some set of basic values oriented around truth-telling, compassion, and a desperate need that all of us have to be connected at the core to a set of kind of shared understanding of things that we can like truly rely on in order to take care of our communities. Journalism, press freedom is critical to that. And I'm always going to be kind of bullish on my sense that this is something that people are willing to fight for. Dapo and Shahidul are remarkable individuals, but their success, their ultimate success, isn't theirs alone. Both of them would tell you that it's taken a courageous community to shore up and buttress their practice, their freedoms, and we're all going to need to be able to kind of continue to draw on that reservoir of community courage. So yes, I'm radically optimistic, Kathleen.
Well, it's hard to imagine that we'll have a better closing line than being radically optimistic. And I can't imagine that we would have been any better served by. We have two of the giants of press freedom in our winners here, Dapo and Shahidul. And they have been at it for a very, very, very long time. They have been incredibly successful, and they stand as an inspiration to all of us who are in this conversation. I thank you very much for joining us, both of you, particularly since the time is punishing where you are. Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Lester. Thank you for your leadership on this issue. Thank you, Patrick, for the support that OSF gives us and your eloquence on the issue. Dapo, thank you for your leadership, and Shahidul for your firebrand, fist in the air attitude about this issue that's so important. And thank you to all of you who joined us in this special conversation. Thank you very much and have a good evening.
Thank you very much.
And be radically optimistic.
Absolutely.